Well, welcome back to the Preaching While Black podcast, a podcast committed to the content, craft, and the call of the Black preaching tradition. This podcast is powered by the Invisible Institute, and I have a very special guest today, Dr. Charles Goodman. He is a friend of one of my pastoral leaders, Pastor Pointer here in Little Rock, and he is doing some amazing work in Augusta. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with him today. And we'll see you guys on the other side.
Welcome to the Preaching While Black podcast, a podcast dedicated to the calling, craft, and content of the Black preaching tradition. And now, here's your host, John C. Richards Jr.
Dr. Goodman, what's going
up,
on,
Jay?
brother?
How
are you
my
doing,
friend?
man?
I'm doing
Good.
okay. Trying to stay warm. It's cold in Augusta.
Oh, y'all don't know cold in Georgia, man. We don't
Listen,
know cold in Georgia.
That's right. That's why we're not handling it this well, right? Like,
Yeah.
But it's crazy, man. But I'm glad, man. I'm good hanging in there. It's supposed to be warm on tomorrow. By the time, I'm not sure when we're going to share this, but, we're getting ready to move into the New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. Yeah. And it's been cold, but then it's going to be 65 degrees this weekend. So I just don't get it.
That sounds much better. That sounds much better.
Yeah, but we'll see. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Dr. Goodman, let me just start here, because when people look at your degrees, it's like this brother just loves being educated. Undergrad from Wake Forest, master's from Candler in Atlanta, got a D-Min from Wesley Theological Seminary in D.C., and because that wasn't enough, you are currently in a PhD program at Anderson, getting a PhD in leadership. I want to talk about that in a little bit, but you're certainly now pastoring a church in Augusta, been there for over 15 years, Tabernacle Baptist Church, faithfully plotting and preaching the gospel there in Augusta. I want to start, though, with your call to ministry, and talk about when it was that you felt this sense that Charles Goodman was called to the task of preaching.
That's great, man. Once again, I'm excited for this conversation. I really appreciate you allowing me to come and share on this amazing platform with you, man. I really love the work you're doing and love all that you have done for the kingdom, man. So just want you to know how much you are honored and respected, man. So really appreciate you. Man, it's an interesting question you would ask. I don't know if I necessarily knew it as much as it was confirmed by those around me. I was adopted at 14 months of age by my maternal grandparents, Deacon Ernest and Mother Charlotte Swan, and they just had a foundation of faith. I grew up United Holy Church, but I will admit I got pictures now that they had me back when I was 7 or 8 years old, putting on my grandfather's shirt and preaching in the vacuum cleaner. Like, there is literal pictorial evidence of me re-preaching the preacher's sermon from church that day into it. Now, I will tell you, be very honest, I kind of grew up in tradition. I love the experience of the Pentecostal church, but I don't really necessarily remember the sermons of my pastor. I knew they were passionate. I knew they were long. So it wasn't necessarily growing up that preaching was center. It was more experience. But I just loved to hear preaching. My grandmother is so interesting, was raised at a time where women were not considered to have the gift of preaching. So she was given her missionary license. I would go through her stuff and she would have sermons she had written because she was a ghostwriter for some of the bishops in our denomination.
Wow.
Just heavy theological. Even now I go home, we just transitioned her to an assisted living home and having to go through her stuff and see all the things that she had. Or my grandfather was a deacon, over the superintendent of Sunday school, and seeing him every night read the Bible. So even though it was more experiential in my experience growing up in my denomination and in my faith tradition, I was just drawn to preaching. Just for some reason, I was like, man, what is this? Like, I just wanted more of it. I was a church kid, to this day. I think that's one of the wonderful things that I'm grateful that God put me in that home and to be formed by that. So I knew something about preaching, even though preaching wasn't prominent in my faith tradition growing up. But I will be honest, man, I transitioned to like the Baptist church my senior year of high school.
Huh.
Now, I'll be honest with you, man. I went to the Baptist church because that's where the girls were. I kind of got, man, I was of age, man, and my grandparents, man, my grandma kind of had this like weird split with the church. And, church is always fighting. And so, like, my granddad would go. No one was left at the church. My pastor, he started his own church. So, I was playing basketball. And I wanted to go where the girl. So that's what really honestly took me to the Baptist church. And it was there some of the giants in my city in Greensboro, like a Curtis Brown, a William Wright. Man, I began to see how they were structuring. And there was coherence and clarity to what they were saying. And I was like, yo, this is so dope. Like, they would just be able to flow. And I was like, man, this is great. Even growing up, my granddad taking me to revival. Like, it was just, I was hearing it, but not necessarily knowing exactly what it was. So I've always kind of been enamored with preaching and what it does and how it made me feel as a disciple. Now, for my personal call, I will admit that even though I was, grew up in church, I played music, I had this call I felt early, but I was like, man, I don't know preachers who make good money. I want to be a lawyer. Man, that was my whole plan and dream. I'm going to law school, man. I am going to be a lawyer, and then I may preach on the side. That's honestly what I was thinking. And everything, even up until that point, going to Wake Forest University, having an opportunity to play ball for a year before I broke my foot a couple times. And then that experience there, I'm trying to give myself aim to go to law school. And then it was my senior year, Jay, that I got diagnosed with ALS. And I was told by my doctor, I'm just turning 21. I'm entering my last semester of college. And they said you had 2 years to live.
Wow.
So you can imagine for someone who had all these dreams, going to law school, balling out, and man, it really kind of hit me. And I never forget that having to wrestle with that night, I was playing drums at a church in Winston-Salem, Grace United Baptist Church, real small Baptist church, Pastor Joseph Parks. I was there playing because the organist of the Wake Forest Gospel Choir played there, and I was playing drums for the gospel choir. So I was just going there for practice, man. It wasn't nothing. I'm just trying, when you're in college, you ain't really thinking too much of church. I went to church, but it was something to do if I woke up from whatever I did on Saturday. You know what I'm saying? But I wanted to really get better at playing drums. I hadn't played it for a while. And so he was my pastoral covering in that season. I'll never forget giving him a call. I didn't want to stay in Greensboro. I was going back to Winston, and I called him, and he met me at McDonald's in Kernersville, which is in between Greensboro and Winston-Salem. And he said it was 3:00 at night at a McDonald's, and we sat there, and I'm just bawling. I don't know what to say. And he said, Chuck, which is my nickname back home. He was like, man, I really feel like this is God getting your attention.
Wow.
And he said, I really feel like, man, I've been noticing you and watching you, that there's a tremendous call on your life. And I really feel like this may be a moment for you to surrender and submit. And Jay, I'll be honest with you, I made it back to my room that night. I'm sitting in my dorm room with student apps at Wake Forest, and I make this prayer, which has been the singular thing that has kept me. I said, God, if it's just 2 years, I give you those 2 years.
Wow.
I said, God, I will submit to this call. I know it's kind of on me. People see it. My grandparents affirming me. I'm waking up in the middle of the night as a kid, and they praying over me, oil on my head. I had this affinity towards preaching, didn't know exactly what it was. And now to have this affirmation, say, God, if it's just 2 years, I give you those 2 years. And Jay, man, it's been 22 years since that prayer. And I really believe that what has kept me alive is my yes that I gave to God on that night.
That's so good.
And so I got serious about it. When I tell you, I said, man, I ain't going to play with this. Let me see what I need to do. I don't know what it's going to be, but I told God I'm going to do it. Confirmed my call with my pastor, man. We set up my initial sermon. And, man, I've been preaching. I gave my first licensed sermon April 2001. And so I'm now on 21 years of preaching. And, man, I haven't looked back since, right? Like I epitomize what that scripture say, put your hand to the plow. Don't look back.
Don't look back.
Man, it's just been this evolution of just trying to figure out how to get better at this thing, trying to communicate, be a better disciple. And man, God really kind of did a fast thing from that moment, from that one yes in my student app apartment at Wake Forest University, and really just saying, God, I don't know what else is going to do, but I'm going to give whatever the rest of my life is, you got it. You got it, right? And that's what kind of took me on this journey, man. We could talk more about what that looked like, because I still try to hold on to that law bug. But Lord said,
Right.
Gotcha.
No, that's not going to happen. But that seed definitely planted some things in terms of policy advocacy. We're going to talk about that. But I really like the idea, because I know that you're a gifted expositor, a gifted preacher. I've seen you preach on several occasions. And one of the things I appreciate about you, though, is not just your role as preacher, but your role as leader and the call to lead. And we've talked about this before. You feel like you have this call to be a leader. You feel like leadership is one of your sweet spots, this thing that makes you come alive. That's why you're doing a PhD in leadership. Yeah. And some preachers focus a lot on preaching and teaching, but tend to neglect leadership.
Yeah.
Why is leadership so important to you in terms of your call as a preacher?
Man, here's the reality, man. Preaching grows people, leadership grows churches, or whatever organization you want to put in. So that is really a thing for me that I really take very seriously. And I want to work on both. Like, I feel like we grew up in a time, Jay, generations before us, man, the preacher, especially the black preacher in the black church context, was just known for how many revivals you had, right? You was known how well you could put the crowd in a frenzy. Because there's nothing like black preaching. I mean, let's be honest, man. We go into any section, man, they love our preaching, the passion for which we give. But I think our generation is that, all right, I don't just want to be known how many revivals I do, but I also want to be known for the work that I am leading, the church that I am shepherding. And I think that's what our generation has kind of taken as our onus. Like, nowadays, you're not known for how many people. They ask me, man, Goody, man, how many revivals are you doing? They want to know, man, how's the work going? Prominence and our claim to fame, whatever that is, man, how's your church? And I know that I will always be intrinsically tied with the churches I've led, from Pleasant View, my first assignment, to now Tabernacle. And so I just feel like you got to learn how to lead. And so leadership takes on a lot of things. I try to work on leading from the pulpit. What does that mean when we talk about preaching and setting out the direction, the spiritual direction of the church? Also, I'm over 40-some people, staff in our church, that I take very seriously the responsibility, because I have to help them provide for their family. I'm a community leader and understand what that means within the context of not just here locally, but also as I travel and I do more about that. So I feel like leadership is so significant and important, and I can't drop that. Like, my leadership and my spiritual development and guidance, it goes beyond the pulpit. So when I'm crafting sermons, when I'm thinking through things, I have to hold those two things in tension. Preaching, leadership, they're together. They're intrinsically tied. I don't see them being opposite of one another. They are together.
So we talked about your call as a preacher, your call as a leader. After the break here, we want to talk about the craft, how you put together your messages. A lot of people see you as a wordsmith, see you as someone who can really shape sermons in a way that really is transformative. And they're looking forward to hearing from you on this. So we'll be right back after the break.
Scholars have referred to the original black church as the invisible institution because enslaved people were often not allowed to worship freely. They'd have to gather, sing, and preach in secret to avoid being beaten. Yet they still developed a deep devotion to the authority of Scripture and the liberation narrative. Today, many Christians who don't fully agree with conservatives or progressives feel invisible. They're not well represented in politics or mainstream media. In response, the AND campaign has created the Invisible Institution newsletter, or IVI. We'll be providing political commentary, policy breakdowns, and more for Christians who believe in social justice and moral order, not one or the other. Go to andcampaign.org and subscribe if you're sick and tired of feeling invisible.
All right, let's talk about the craft of preaching, PG. We're talking to a group of folks who are preachers who have to every week stand up and proclaim. And a lot of them are trying to figure out how they can best use the tools that God has given to us as a people in order to craft better sermons. Can you tell me, what is the one thing that you find most helpful as you're crafting your sermons each week or putting together series?
Man, it's great. Thanks, Terry. It's so interesting because I get this question all the time, and I'm still amazed that people consider me a good preacher because I'm still trying to hone and develop my own voice. When I listen to such great preachers, man, that I hear, and, your boss and my best friend, Pointer, and others who I hear, man, I'm just amazed at their insight and how they're able to craft. Like, these are just guys who've been preaching. You can just tell they came out the womb preaching, right? It's almost like, man, This is not fair. Like, I really, how do you get all this? Like, this is not fair. I got some things I need to ask the Lord when I get to heaven, right? But I feel like for me, my whole thing, once again, my Pentecostal upbringing, where I felt more passion, I get into the Baptist church, what gives more structure. So for me, I've trying to find a way to marry both within the context of my sermonic presentation. So whether it has to be purposeful and passionate, right? And practical. I feel like those are very keen things that to do. Now, I'm a series preacher. I can tell you now that I've already kind of laid out the themes for the year until 2031. So crazy. Over Christmas, I got some sleep. So I kind of, this year, 2023 to be all in, 2024, unity, 2025, stretch, 2026, fulfill promises, 2027, maximizing moments, 2028, the year of yes, 2029, the year to multiply, 2030 is the year of legacy, and 2031 is the year of acceleration. So I already
8 years out?
I've kind of figured out how I want to get us together, right? And so that gives me the thing. So I know within the context of my church, larger things, and then I'm going to do about 7 or 8 series. I've developed this kind of homiletical approach based upon my church. I know how we are to be. I need to be a series preacher because for me, I love the continuity of knowing where I'm going next week. I don't want to henpeck. I don't want to look. I want to already know what I'm doing, right? So even as we're speaking now, I got 8 services this weekend, 4 New Year's Eve, 4 New Year's Day. So that's 2 different sermons. Closing out the year, Deuteronomy 6, I think be all in. And then on New Year's Day, I'm starting a series called Sold Out, where I'm walking through the life of Abraham. So I was actually this week kind of outlining, that, because I got 10 weeks to do Abraham, and it sucks because there's so much you can pull out of Abraham. Like, I'm like sitting here like, I can't get this in 10 weeks, right? But I'm trying my absolute best to do it. So for me, it's knowing where I'm going. That's number one. But it's also, I am a narrative thinker, but I'm also life situational in my presentation. I think we limit ourselves when we just call each other expositors or topical, because I think exposition is, in layman's term, regardless of how people want to preach it, verse by verse, whatever you want to say, is literally taking the meaning of the text and let that be the foundation of your sermon. Yeah. Right? Exposition within itself, it is literally just taking what that text says and what the author intended for it to mean, and for us to contemporize it, to bring it within our local context and to share the truth of that text in a real, relevant, purposeful way. So for me, that's my aim. So I'm life situational. I'm always trying to figure out, how does this text apply to your life? I'm also one who wrestles with the tension. There's tension here, because that tension is what really draws and kind of allows me to kind of build upon where I want to kind of put this sermon into its context. Like, I also have in my mental mind a sermon EPO, right? So I know I'm going to have my opening statements. I need to get my the tension, which is going to kind of draw me. That's going to move me from head to heart. Then I'm going to move to the exegetical thought, central theme. What's the relevant question? I stole from George Parks that take-home truth, which I think is dope. And then through that, it answers the question. So my movements, how I want to go through this passage, is answering this question, right? And it could take on a different form. Sometimes it's alliterative, sometimes it's not. I've been trying really lately to get out of certain normative patterns. Yeah. Because when you preach every week, sometimes we develop a system. And I feel like sometimes our system robs us from the ability to be creative, right?
That's good.
Like, I did something in October this past year that was kind of different. I kind of did like a one-person movie about the prodigal son. I did 2 weeks of prodigal son. Yeah. I did the father, and then I did the elder brother. And I just kind of wanted to do it. Jay, let me be honest with you. The reason I did it is because I had lost my creativity. I was just tired, and I don't want to do a regular sermon. I just want to do something different. Let me put myself in these characters. And it really was dope. My congregation really embraced it. A lot of people throughout the world loved it. And it's so interesting. It really just came because I was like, you know what? I just want to do something different. I don't know how this is going to be received. I don't know how my preaching brethren and sister are going to judge me. They may call me a heretic because, I'm taking liberties. I'm dressing this way. I was like, I felt like I need to do something different. Jay, I would also say there's a difference when you preach to the same congregation week in and week out.
Yeah.
Right? You want to give them something different. Jay, you have kids. You can't feed them the same thing every week. And you also recognize your children have different needs and wants, all right? Like your kid, some may love more vegetables. Some may like this. So you got to figure out, what is my opportunity if I'm the chief chef of this place serving homiletical food? Let me figure out different ways to do it. So that's what kind of pushes me. I've always been intrigued by creativity and trying to do that and trying to grow in that aspect. But back to the thing of content. So I'm life situational. I want to believe I'm expositional. I really wrestle with the tension. And I'm spending time with the story.
Right.
I don't think, here's the crazy thing, Jane, this is going to sound so crazy. I don't think enough of us spend enough time in the Bible.
That's it.
We don't spend enough time in the Bible. We really don't know the nuances of the Bible. And I think it's because we just go to it to get sermons. One of the most critical things that changed my life and my preaching, Jay, was in my first assignment at Pleasant View Missionary Baptist Church, wonderful people in a little town that ain't in the city in Salem, Alabama. I was preaching to them week in and week out, but I was not reading the Bible to feed myself. And so I'm feeding people, but I'm malnutrition myself. And God convicted me because how can I feed them and not feed myself? So one of the critical things that have been very helpful for me is maintaining my spiritual disciplines of reading scripture outside of sermon prep. I'm not just reading the Bible to get the sermon, or to make sure that I'm parsing the Greek and the Hebrew, making sure that I'm getting, no, I really just love reading the Bible and the stories and getting it and just putting myself in it. And that allows me this ability to kind of just know it. And when it comes out, because as you know, I don't write my sermons. I have remembered every sermon I've ever preached since I started preaching over 20 years ago. And part of that was because of my diagnosed ALS. I have nerve issues in my right side, which did not allow me to write. So I've had to, God exposed that I had photographic memory as a gift. And so give me my sermon, give me that book, and let me go to work and kind of develop it that way. So I'm hoping that answered it when it comes to the content piece, because it's such an evolving piece. It's so evolving.
Definitely answers that question. I think it's very important what you said about storytelling, man. We have access to the greatest story ever told. And if anybody needs to be storytellers, it needs to be preachers. So I commend you and thank you for taking that narrative approach, taking the approach of looking at those 3 stories in October. I think it was really dope, man. I think Hollywood has taken the storytelling motif and they have made money off of that motif when the story itself, the grandest story of all, needs to be told by men and women who stand up and proclaim every week. So I appreciate that, man. Hey, tell me one more thing. We're talking about craft of preaching. If you were on a deserted island, I put PG on a deserted island, and outside of the Bible, and you had 3 resources that you could take with you every time you prepare sermons, what would they be?
That's great. That Logos, even though it's not, I only use my commentaries down by Saturday. That's about my last period when I'm trying to cement certain things is when I go to Matt. So Logos, it's okay, right? Like it's cool. I feel like I don't utilize it as best as it could, I just kind of go, I plug in my text and trying to get whatever background I need to get on. It's almost become more ritual than needed, per se, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Oh, man, that's good. You guys put me on something. It's an electronic piece a few years ago called Sonic Light that I enjoy. I actually got an opportunity to meet him and interview him. Blue Letter Bible.
Yep.
But if it's a book, man, that's so good. Beside my Bible, that's it, man. I love just those reading. No, it's like
no, that's great.
Yeah, that would be it, because there's no really, and I'm glad you pushed that, because, I have a lot of different kind of commentaries, but when it comes to it, just reading a word for me just kind of gets me, and I just really understand it. I think it's an innate gift God gave me is this unusual comprehension of what could be very complex things. And God just shows me different things, right? And I've always had a curious mind. So even this morning, I'm listening to a podcast that was discussing what does it mean to, what happened on Silent Saturday, and this whole thing of what is harrowing of hell, like when Jesus, what happens when he goes down and those kind of things. And so,
and preaches a revival.
Yeah, that whole piece. And what does that mean to proclaim the gospel? Does that mean he was down there evangelizing, or as most scholars would suggest, he was down there declaring victory and basically saying that, no, are you with me or you're not? It's not to say per se, it's to declare what has happened. So it's just always interesting to me how this whole thing of evolving revelation, like just when you think you know everything about something, something new comes about it. So, man, that's a great question, 3. I wish I had that. Man, I wish I'd have been prepared for that one. But yeah, that Bible's
no,
good
that
for
was
me.
good. I think you gave us 3 good resources, man. I think that Sonic Light is great. And then
it's conservative. It's conservative.
Yeah. And we always, listen, we always have to put some seasoning on them, man.
Yeah, you got to put some seasoning on it.
You know how that rolls.
Yeah,
you know how that rolls.
Yeah, but I think that's the beauty of it. Or even exposing ourselves, and I always tell people, and this is good, Jay, that you on this platform, expose yourself to even views and theologies you don't agree with.
Yeah.
Don't limit yourself, right? Like, grow, expand. That is one thing I would say seminary did give me, was the ability to be exposed to things and to appreciate those views, but not necessarily have to ingest it for myself.
That's it. Yeah.
Like, wow, man, that's interesting. Okay. All right. Bless you. I don't agree, but good. And it really began to fortify my own faith. Because then I was able to concretely say what I believe once I was in this whole piece. I think it's Paul's Acts 17, right? Like, that's where I feel like we are.
Yeah.
Now we went from Acts 2. Yeah. We went from Acts 2 to now we're in Acts 17. We're in a pluralistic culture. But here's Paul said, but there's this no-name God that you keep referencing. Let me go ahead and tell you who that is, right?
But not everybody can navigate that well, though. You know what I mean? Like, the navigation of that, like, we talked about, like, I love seminary too, because I would take those ideas and I say, that's good, but, certainly am not going to be an orthodox position for me, but it's good to know that. Yeah. Now, not everybody's able to receive that in that way, and it may cause some folks to start to doubt and fall away. Yeah. So I think that's what, Scripture tells us. We have this measure of faith. I think we have to be honest with ourselves to make sure that we understand that, hey, I can't go into that environment because it may actually impact who I am. Yeah. So we've talked about the craft of preaching. I want to move to the content because I think you have a very unique position there in Augusta, and want to talk about the content of your preaching, specifically the social location of your preaching. We'll do that right here after the break. What's up, Preaching While Black fam? Listen, I hope this interview has been a blessing so far. If you want more content and resources around Preaching While Black, go over to our YouTube channel, Preaching While Black. We have all the episodes from our interviews up, but we also have other resources for you as a Black preacher as you try to hone your craft, your call, and your content for Black preaching. Now back to our episode. All right, man, let's talk about Augusta, Georgia. You are from Greensboro. You actually have pastored in Alabama and Georgia. You've been all down the Bible Belt.
Doc, I'm in it.
And there's a long history of tension. You talked about tension. And tension is high in Augusta right now. I know that we've talked before this time and talked about one of the counties actually annexing themselves, a majority white county, from a majority black county, Richmond County, and Augusta. How do you navigate this tension that we're seeing in a battleground state? Yeah, through your preaching.
Yeah, that's good. I think, honestly, is to raise the query. I don't just believe in social justice preaching as much as I also believe in social justice action. Right? I feel like sometimes that is a tension that we in the Black church wrestle with, because you have one thing that think that every sermon needs to be about social justice. I believe the Bible is about justice. I believe that the Bible is about liberation, right? Against systems. It is both. It's a duality of individual rights, privileges, liberation, and systemic liberation. So I believe that wholeheartedly. Now, it may not be overt in every sermon, but I think that every sermon ought to be able to help people. This is my aim when it comes to preaching. Preaching changes people, and people change the world. Right? My aim when I'm preaching, I've done series race, religion, and Jesus. I've done stuff that I felt, that was in 2016 when we were going through the whole notion of getting ready to get Trump, or just even some things where I was talking through the Lord's Prayer. And I was talking about how revolutionary this prayer is. Notice what you're saying when you say this prayer, right?
Yeah.
So even if it's not overt, it's going to hit you. But I feel like my role as a Black pastor in our area is also understand that I don't just need to be there, what you see on Sunday, but also make sure you're in the streets, you're at the table, right? Those sometimes are not the same, right? We need some people in the street, but we also need people at the table.
That's it.
So as you say about Augusta in Georgia, which is interesting because now, we have elected for the second time a Black Baptist preacher as our senator. I mean, that's kind of revolutionary. I mean, I think it's phenomenal. And not only just any Black pastor, but the Black pastor who leads the church that is known as Martin Luther King Jr. Church. So I don't think we oftentimes really understand how huge and momentous that really is. So I think it is really, I appreciate it because I think Warnock's run here has put faith into the public sphere again, because at some point we kind of lost it. The Black church is interesting where I feel like we're the only ones who kill our own through friendly fire, right? And we will make caricatures. You don't see anybody else make caricatures of their faith and their religion and their institutions. Like there is no caricatures of a Jewish synagogue, right? They don't have, honk for the rabbi, right? But we do it within the context of our church. And I hate that because it just bothers me how we'll make that our thing. Like you'll see no other demographic have their version of Greenleaf.
Oh, that's it.
So I wrestle with that. I'm not saying the church is perfect, but I feel like our witness has to be protected, right? I really feel that in my heart. So when I say that, I'm grateful for Warnock because he really pushed some things on the forefront. He put us back on the map as far as relevance, because for a lot of times they were not seeing us relevant, right? I'm grateful that we got another young brother that's in the conversation that's beyond just who they were used to, like Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, who have done amazing work. I'm never going to deride them. But those were names who for some reason has been sullied by culture for some reason, right? So now we can add a different voice to it. And he's from Georgia. And he's a Black Baptist pastor, right? Of a prominent church that's traditional. You know what I mean? That's really dope. That shows us you can be who you are and still make a difference, not just in the pulpit, but also in life. And so I think that's really has pushed me to be involved, to be engaged. I'm one of those, because of the size of our church and influence of our church, that people have to come talk to me about certain things to get our support. One of the things that's so crazy is that our church is located in 3 different counties. Our main is in Richmond. Our second location is in Columbia County. We're actually having to get ready to open our third in Aiken County, which is, is probably one of the richest counties in South Carolina. I didn't just do that because I wanted to make a spiritual impact. I also wanted to make an impact when it comes to politics, because in those 2 counties, whether it's Richmond and Columbia County, and even as we move into Aiken County, we'll be considered the largest Black church in that county. Matter of fact, our second location in Columbia County, we are the largest Black-owned landowner in Columbia County. So I'm trying to mobilize people. Hey, guys, we need some people on community, on our city council. Hey, no, I'm after I finish this interview today, I got to go help swear in one of my members of the magistrate, judge. Hey, I got to go see the new mayor. He's doing this. Hey, one of my members was the youngest ever to be voted as the school board. So these are things that are important because, once again, I'm trying to empower people. Once again, preaching changes people. People change the world.
Yeah. And it's kind of full circle, man. Like we were talking about this earlier, how you had this passion for legal stuff. It's like, man, I really want to go to law school.
Yeah.
But it feels like God is really filling up and helping you scratch that itch to the work that you're doing through advocacy there locally in Augusta. Yeah. And I always tell folks, man, I think that pastors need to be the lead advocates at their church. I don't even use the word activist because I think scripturally, when I look at the word advocate, we see that in scripture with the paraclete, right?
Yeah,
we see the Holy Spirit who comes alongside of us.
That's good.
And then he calls us alongside people. Yeah. So we're advocates. We need to be advocates, but we don't necessarily do that because we're so consumed with the preaching task.
Yeah.
But we have to be, as leaders and preachers, we have to be able to advocate in our local community. And I appreciate you doing that. Now, I got one last question for you about your advocacy. and it deals with when your congregants don't necessarily agree on issues. So when you have an issue that's a hot button issue, and you have some congregants who might not necessarily agree with one another, how do you address those issues as a pastor?
Great question. I think at the end of the day, we must stand on the truth that we have. Now, once again, when I'm in that pulpit, I'm quick to tell people, you didn't come to hear my opinions. I'm going to share to the best of my ability what I feel God's stance is on certain things, right? God gives his stance. Now, if you want to take me out the pulpit, get some of my personal opinions, I don't mind sharing that with you as well, right? But you don't come on Sundays to hear that. So for me, I try to stay where it is. I think, we have to be honest about the truth. Once again, my leanings are in the liberation. I believe the Bible is social justice. I believe that we, especially within the context of our community, can't have to speak to these ills, right? There is something to be said about making sure that we do what Jesus challenged us to do and deal with the least and the left out, right? Like Jesus in his first public sermon, Luke 4, come on. I mean, he's telling you what we need to do.
That's it.
Psalm 46, it tells us what God is really looking for. So I don't feel like these things, it's not a red or blue thing for me. It really honestly is, how can we be better disciples, right? Like I feel like no platform, be very honest with you, encompasses my full theology, right? But I've learned to understand that these are systems of the world that we have to operate in. I mean, God did tell us we're in the world, but not of the world. But we still have to speak to those things. We still have to be civically engaged. So I need you to vote. Even whatever your convictions are, vote. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not going to tell you which way to vote, but I need you to vote. I need you to be involved in the process. If that is such a serious thing for you, then get involved. And for me, that's what it is. I think my job as a pastor is to be the resident theologian. It's to really challenge people to think outside your norms and your context and even your preconceived notions. Let's push why you think this way. Let's talk about why this is important. Let's talk about why we can say we can be pro-choice, but that doesn't mean we are pro-abortion, right? Like there's nuance to our belief and nuance to our theology where we understand what this looks like. What is God caring for the people? What does that mean? And it's our responsibility in here, right? So I feel like throw those out there. And yes, there's been some people who probably didn't like certain things and probably didn't agree with certain things I said. It is the crazy thing. The thing they probably don't agree with most ain't political stances, but sometimes when it comes to what Paul talked about with relationships, you get in trouble about some of that stuff. But it was more like, this is my responsibility. And if everyone agreed, then I'm not doing my job. Right? There's no universal agreement with anything we're going to say, right? But I hope that people, and I've loved this about the people that God has graced me to lead, is that there are people who absolutely may disagree with my stance, but honor the fact that I have one. And I'm passionate about it and say, Pastor, I don't agree with it, but man, you believe it. And the fact that you believe it is why I rock with you.
That's good. Yeah.
So I feel like that's been pretty dope.
Man, this has been such a rich conversation, man. Thank you for coming through and discussing your call and your craft and your content and your preaching. This has been helpful for folks, I think.
Jay, it's been great, man. Anytime, man. Love it. And keep doing it, man. Keep bringing these people out, these views out. This is so important. We need to hear more from just the pastor's perspective, because many times people don't understand the behind the scenes. They see the pulpit or they see the podcast or they see other things, but don't really get to know who we are. So, man, I appreciate this venue, man. I'm praying amazing success to you and the work that you're doing through this podcast.
Same to you, man. Ladies and gentlemen, Pastor Charles Goodman Jr., the pastor of Tabernacle Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia. Appreciate you for joining us, sir.
Bless you, my friend.
Wow, such a great conversation with Pastor Charles Goodman Jr. We appreciate the work that he's doing there in Augusta. I want you to do us a favor. Go over to all the podcast platforms and subscribe to the podcast. We also have a great YouTube community. It's called Preaching While Black over on YouTube. You can also follow us on our social media accounts at Preaching Black. We love bringing you content and resources to help with your call, to help with your craft, and to help with your content. We'll see you all next go round.
Thanks for listening to the Preaching While Black podcast. For more helpful content and resources, connect with us online at preachingwhileblack.com.